week 6 of the fantasy football season. And here's the top 12 defenses I'm ranking this week. The first one, the Los Angeles Rams. So the Rams here have a very good matchup in week 6 at the New York Giants. And right here, this Giant team, they're decimated with injuries. Daniel Jones, we don't know if he's going to play. Kenny Golladay, Sterling Shepard, and Darius Slayton, their top 3 receivers on their depth chart, all hurt. And Saquon Barkley, most likely not going to play in this game after a bad ankle sprain versus the Dallas Cowboys in week 5. So right here, the last couple weeks, they've had some tough matchups with the Rams, but now they got the New York Giants and then the Detroit Lions coming up on the schedule. And here this week, if Mike Glennon does start this game for the Giants, I think this Ram team could have one of the better performances all season from any DST this season here. Wouldn't surprise me to see them get 4 or 5 sacks in this game, 2 or 3 interceptions, hold them to a single-digit score, and possibly find the end zone. So either if it's Daniel Jones or Glennon, I think this Ram team has a huge day here in week 6. The second defense I'm ranking this week is the Pittsburgh Steelers. So the Steelers last week played some decent defense versus the Denver Broncos in the 27-19 victory. 19 points, 2 sacks, and an into in that ball game. But right here in week 6, they got a good matchup versus the Seattle Seahawks, who are banged up with injuries as well. Chris Carson, we don't know if he's going to play. And we know Russell Wilson's out 6 to 8 weeks after breaking his finger here. So Geno Smith time it is over there in Seattle. And Smith, he looked pretty decent, in my opinion, coming in relief of Wilson in last week's ball game, just to fall short versus the Rams in that one. But right here, Geno Smith, I don't still think he's a good quarterback really at all. And I think this Steelers defense can make a few plays in this game, get a couple interceptions, couple sacks on him. He's no Russell Wilson, no doubt about it. And it wouldn't surprise me to see them reach double digits pretty easily this week. The third defense I'm ranking this week is the Indianapolis Colts. So the Colts, they got jumped up in a lot of ads this week on the waiver wire, up 40%. Now they're owned in 84% of fantasy leagues. In the last couple weeks here, the Colts have played pretty good defense in terms of fantasy football, but not really real-life football. It's still giving up a lot of points. Week 3 at the Titans, 25 points allowed, a sack, 2 windows, a fumble recovery. Week 4 at Miami, 17 points allowed, 3 sacks, 2 fumbles. And week 5 at Baltimore, 31 points allowed, 2 sacks, and a fumble recovery. So right here, they're getting some turnovers. They're getting to the quarterback. And here in week 6, they should be able to get to David Mills and past this Houston Texan offensive line, even though we saw David Mills last week tear up that New England Patriot defense for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. So right here, the Houston Texans do give up the third most fantasy points to DSTs. And I think this week Indianapolis has a good week. Number 4, the Buffalo Bills. So the Bills, what a season it's been for them so far. 4-1 on the season. They got a lot of defense. They went on the draft this offseason. And their defensive line is very strong, and their secondary has some ball hawk guys like White, obviously, and Micah Hyde as well. So the last 3 games, they've had some huge fantasy days, is this Bill team. Week 3 versus Washington, 21 points allowed, a sack, 2 windows, a fumble recovery. Week 4 versus Houston, they shut them out, 3 sacks, 4 interceptions, and a fumble recovery. And then week 5 at Kansas City, I said to bench him last week, but I was totally wrong. This defense is the real deal, legit. 2 sacks, 2 windows, 2 fumble recoveries, and a pick 6 from Micah Hyde in that ball game versus Patrick Mahomes. So right here, I think they're going to pounce on Ryan Tannehill and this weak offensive line over there in Tennessee. We saw in week 1 Arizona really get to Tannehill. And I think in this game, this Buffalo Bill DST could do a lot of damage on Tannehill and this O-line and play a good one. Number 5, the Green Bay Packers. So the Packers, they were a hot ad on the waiver wire this week, added in 26% of fantasy leagues. In the last few weeks here, this Packer DST's been pretty decent. Week 3 at San Francisco, 28 points allowed, 4 sacks, and into fumble recovery. Week 4 versus the Steelers, 2 sacks, 17 points allowed, an into and a fumble recovery. And last week at Cincinnati, 3 sacks and 2 interceptions with 22 points allowed. So right here, week 6 at Chicago, obviously a division foe and division rival here in Soldier Field. This Green Bay Packers team's going. And Justin Fields, in my opinion, he don't pass the eye test right now. He's holding on to the ball too long. He's taking too many big hits, and he's taking sacks. And I think this Green Bay defensive line could get to Justin Fields early and often in this game and also make a few turnovers happen as well. So I like the Packers at number 5. Number 6, the Denver Broncos. So the Broncos pretty solid this season in real life and fantasy football. They're really holding teams down for the most part, or making these teams at least earn every point they put on the board this season here is Denver. So they got a good matchup versus a division foe as well here in the Vegas Raider. I know the last 2 weeks they didn't really do much for fantasy football is the Denver Broncos with tough matchups versus Baltimore and then the Pittsburgh Steelers last week. But right here, week 6 versus this Vegas Raider team with a lot of things going on with Gruden out as the head coach. Now moving parts, it's going to be new head coach system possibly here for this Vegas Raider team. And I think it's going to take them a few weeks to find it again. And I think the Broncos, they're at home, which they play better defense, no doubt about it, when they're the home team in Mile High Stadium. And I think they're going to get to Derek Carr a few times in this game. And we've seen Carr over the last few games take some bad hits and throw some bad football. So I think the Broncos in this game could get a few sacks, get a few turnovers, and I like them at number 6. Number 7, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Buccaneers, they've had a few decent games this season on the DST side of things. But the last couple games, they haven't been as great as I thought they would. Week 4 at New England, for 17 points allowed, 4 sacks, and into a fumble recovery. And last week versus Miami, 17 points allowed, 3 sacks, and into and a fumble recovery. So this week here tonight at the Philadelphia Eagles to kick off week 6 here for this Tampa Bay Buck DST here. And Eagles, they put up some points, but we also see sometimes this Eagle team, they don't score. Like last week, they didn't get their offense going till the third quarter versus the Carolina Panthers. And I think the Bucks here can make a few plays on Jalen Hurts, even though he's been one of the better quarterbacks this season in fantasy football. But right here, I think they're good for a few sacks, couple turnovers in this game, and possibly holding Philly anywhere from 17 to 21 points. Number 8, the Cincinnati Bengals. So the Bengals were a hot pickup this week, added in 30% of fantasy leagues. They got a good matchup at the Detroit Lions. They give up the 9th most fantasy points to defenses here. So right here, the last couple weeks, they haven't done much is this Bengal defense. Week 4 versus Jacksonville, 21 points allowed and a sack. And week 5 versus Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, 25 points allowed, 2 sacks and an into. So right here, week 6 at Detroit, Jared Goff, he hasn't been turning the ball over that much, but this Detroit Lion offense just doesn't score a lot of points. And I think in this ball game in the indoor dome over there in Detroit, it's going to be a low-scoring type of game, like a 20-16 type of game, something along those lines, I believe here. And I think this Bengal team, they could have a decent fantasy day, anywhere from 7 to 10 fantasy points. Number 9, the Miami Dolphins. So the Dolphins, I've mentioned them a few times this week here, and they're a 1-week play only, in my opinion, because they're versing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who give up the 4th most fantasy points to defenses and special team units. And this Dolphin team's done nothing pretty much on the defensive end of things this season, besides week 3 at the Raiders, but they still gave up 29 points, 3 sacks, but a pick 6 saved their fantasy day. And the last couple weeks, they versed the Colts and Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who torched them for 45 points last week. So right here, it's going to be a low-scoring game, I think, versus Jacksonville and the Miami Dolphins this week. It's another London game this week as well. 9:30 start East Coast and 6:30 a.m. West Coast. So right here, the Dolphins, the DST's been added in 12% of fantasy leagues. And I think they could have a decent day and at least hold Trevor Lawrence and this Jaguar team to a low point total. The next defense this week's the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jaguars here, they only got added in 2% of fantasy leagues this week. And the last couple weeks, they haven't been totally horrible, was this Jacksonville team. Week 3 versus Arizona, 25 points allowed, but a return touchdown and an interception. Week 4 at Cincinnati, 24 points allowed and a sack. And last week versus Tennessee, 31 points allowed, 3 sacks in that game. So right here versus Jacoby Brissett and this Dolphin offense, I think they can make a few plays, at least get a few sacks in this game. And Jacksonville's looking to get off the schneid as well, that they're 0-5 this season. So the Dolphins do give up the 2nd most fantasy points to DSTs. And I think Jacksonville could be a decent defense and finish in the top 10 this week. Number 11, the Dallas Cowboys. So the Dallas Cowboys, they've been surprising for fantasy football this season as a DST tad. After last season was a historically bad season, giving up 30-plus points a game was the Cowboys. But the last few weeks, they're still giving up a lot of points, but still making plays and putting up fantasy points. Week 3 versus Philly, 15 points allowed, 2 sacks, 2 windows, including a pick 6. Week 4 versus Carolina, 28 points allowed, but they had 5 sacks and 2 windows. And Week 6 versus that depleted Giant offense, 20 points allowed, 2 windows, including a pick 6 by Anthony Brown. So Week 6 here, they got a good matchup in New England that gives up the 7th most fantasy points to defenses this season. I think the Cowboys in this one, they're still going to give up 20 to 24 points minimum in this game. But I think they can make Mac Jones make a few turnovers and get a few sacks on him. And the 12th and final defense I have this week's the Kansas City Chiefs. So the Chiefs, they've been a piss-poor unit defensively this season. But this week, it's a matchup-based type of thing here for this Chief team. At the Washington football team, who's prone to having a few turnovers, is Taylor Heineke. And I think in this game, the Chiefs, they're 2-3 this season. Some bad losses versus Baltimore, versus the Chargers, and versus the Buffalo Bills. 3 teams right now way ahead of them in the AFC. So right now, they're going to come out and set the tone. And I think it starts with defense in this one. They got to get pressure on Taylor Heineke, and they got to stop Gibson. If they could stop Antonio Gibson early in this game and make this Washington offense one-dimensional, which I think is going to happen, I expect big things from this Kansas City defense in this game. And it wouldn't surprise me to see him have a pick 6 and a few sacks in this game. So that's the top 12 defenses I'm ranking for Week 6 of the fantasy football season.